And then I just wait for it to sync with the YouTubes.
Are you getting any kind of echo or anything from my microphone?
No.
It sounds okay? Okay.
It sounds okay. You sound perfectly fine. I'm just waiting for the live to pick up on the YouTubes. Okay, so welcome everyone to the January live show of the Shards and Sorcery Book Club. I'm your host Reija. You are on my channel, the Book Finch, and I host the Swords and Sorcery Book Club every month, and we read either anthologies or magazines or collections of short stories each month. And this month, or rather in December, we read the first issue of a new semi-pro zine called Khōréō magazine. And today we are going to be discussing with Kristen from Kristenelle SFF Reader. Kristen, will you introduce yourself and tell us what your channel is all about and what's coming up in the pipeline?
Yeah, I'm Kristen, and my channel is Kristenelle SFF Reader, which is really hard to say. I almost primarily read science fiction and fantasy books that are published. Basically anything that's eligible for the current Hugo Awards. My goal is to really be ready for the Hugo Awards, but also to judge whether or not I really think the best things are getting the attention they deserve, et cetera, et cetera. So I talk a lot about that kind of stuff. And yeah, so if you watch my channel, you'll see a lot of reviews of current releases and speculation about awards and stuff. So I think that's it.
And I personally really have been enjoying your diaries that you do I think that's just such a fun way to name your because it's kind of like a reading journal, but in a visual format. I just think that it's a fun way to, name it. Just not just like a wrap up is kind of formal, but a journal is kind of just cozy and chilling.
Yeah, because I'm not necessarily just telling you about the things that I finished. I just like telling you how it went reading, and I might talk about the same book 3 weeks in a row.
Yeah, but that's fine. Yeah. So I'm just gonna quickly share my screen because oh no. Or I would if I knew what screen everything was. Never mind then. Hey. Oh, that was wrong. Failed attempt. I was going to show you the Khōréō issue 1 cover. That's on
Which
my.
Is so pretty. I love the cover so much. Absolutely beautiful.
Oh, do I? Yes, I think now I can get it. So what was your initial expectations of this magazine going in? Because this is the very first issue of the whole magazine. It was started last year. So what were your expectations going in and the general vibe you were feeling that the magazine was going to give you before you started reading it?
So, I mean, I know that the focus of the magazine is publishing authors that are immigrants or part of a diaspora. So I was really looking forward to maybe discovering some new authors and definitely just getting a variety of cultural perspectives, and particularly the immigrant perspective, obviously. So I was just really looking forward to I don't know, just getting some new perspectives that maybe I don't normally see in other short story anthologies.
Yeah, I definitely was expecting the same thing, and this kind of like sort of like claiming of space for people that normally are pushed out of places. So kind of like that, like reasserting yourself in a space that traditionally has been excluding you. And I definitely think that the stories did that. And
Yeah.
I think we can just jump straight into talking about the first one, which was The Taste of Centuries, The Taste of Home by Jennifer Hudak. And this one was basically this idea of an alternate world and this kind of like traveling between the space-time continuum and finding new worlds, but like maybe like a multiverse kind of situation. And it also talks about like generations, like 3 generations of like women. Like this is like a multi-generational household that is living together, and it's also like a different experiences that those generations have. So what did you think of this first story?
I thought it was really lovely. I really liked how in the discussion group on Goodreads, Becca from Read Becca said like this story is just so cozy. I think cozy is a great way to describe it. And I think when you start the story, I mean, when you start any story, that kind of the journey of the reader is I'm figuring out what's going on. I'm trying to like get my bearings in the story. So when I was starting it, I'm like, where is this happening? And I was like, maybe it's like a part of Earth. And then I was like, wait, no, this doesn't seem like Earth. And so like that journey was really fun to like kind of figure out like, no, there's somewhere different. And that was really cool. And I really enjoyed the way that food was kind of woven in there. I thought that was it was kind of it felt like a literary device that was used very effectively.
Yeah, I also thought that because this like story also deals with a family member that is losing their memory, like dementia basically is a big thing, a plot device and a theme in this. So there is this, even though the story itself to me felt like it was very almost dreamily told, like you are not sort of set in one specific time, like you are following like multiple instances in this girl's like recent life, and how she's viewing the world and how she's connecting with her family, and also how she's wanting to maybe broaden her horizons and go outside of the comfort zone that her little like what her family has sort of built for her, this comfortable homestead, and she kind of wants to set forth to different worlds and stuff. But like, and that whole thing seems very like kind of slow paced and dreamy, but then there's also that sort of urgency with like how little time she has with her grandmother, and this idea of like trying to learn all those traditions and the bread making and stuff before her grandmother can teach her, though, before her grandmother isn't around to teach her those things anymore. So it's a really weird mix that there's this kind of slowness, but also this urgency and tension in the story.
Yeah, and I really liked the way it was kind of woven together. We kept coming back to them making this bread, but then we would go and explore more too. And I thought the imagery of the bread being braided bread, like she's trying to weave
Yeah.
together parts of herself, was really strong.
I definitely got like the whole braiding the bread thing. Like I know that in this story the bread was like salty, like it was a savory dish, but I just was pulled back into my childhood when I used to do like baking with my own grandma, and there's this like braided sort of sweet bun that we have here, and it's also kind of like braided together, and you can make it in very look very different and very elaborate if you want. And so that's sort of like I definitely felt this certain nostalgia when I was reading this story. Like I definitely felt like I kind of got a connection to my own grandma reading this, so that was lovely. Like, and this was just the prose was so pretty.
Yeah.
Like, it was like almost like reading a sort of poem in a sense, but it wasn't poetry, but it felt like it was like I was wallowing in a lullaby, if that makes sense. Like, does that make sense at all?
Yeah, no, totally. And I think like the whole like magical portal in the forest kind of thing, it just really added a lot to that atmosphere of like, I don't know, it's like magical.
Also, I one thing that I love is usually because there is this magical portal that appears, and there is this other human that comes through the portal that might be possibly from our world, because it is hinted at that grandma has come from Earth, essentially. And sometimes when these kinds of like new people appear in these like portal fantasy stories, they're usually the catalyst of something, or a conflict, or that sort of like in Peter Pan, the person who comes and whisks Wendy away to another world and stuff. But here, it was kind of like a red herring. The person was there, and she just was like, yeah, just go there. You can go back past. Like it was kind of like you were expecting that person to be the start of a conflict, and it was completely like, no. Like,
yeah, as a reader, you definitely expect her to be like, oh, you must be my father. I want to go visit your world. I want to go to, but then she's just like, no, this is my home. I have my people. I like it here. And this is part of who I like.
And it was kind of like that moment, when you're giving a tourist advice on how to get to a place. It was like, go left from here and there, and then you can get back to where you were coming from. Like, it was sort of that kind of moment. Like, it kind of set in stone this idea that these sorts of people just appearing from other worlds, that's kind of everyday life for her. Like, this probably isn't the first portal that she's ever seen, and it's just a thing that happens in this world. So I just thought that was a sort of funny moment to me.
Yeah.
And how would you say this story tackled the core messaging, the core theming of this magazine, giving voices to like diaspora authors? Like, do you think that you got what you were expecting from the story?
Yeah, definitely. Because I feel like the story is all about having pieces of yourself be part of many different worlds and making your home in the place that you're in, despite having all these other pieces, and finding ways to integrate those into who you are and into your home, but ultimately making something totally new also, which I think is the diaspora experience, right? So I thought it was a really poetic portrayal of that.
Yeah, and I also think that it was interesting to show that, there's this, like, from generation to generation, how the views in which you view yourself kind of change, because her grandma is from a completely different place, and she has come to make a home for herself in this place. So she's kind of off two worlds. And then there's her mother, who was born in the other place, but she doesn't remember it. So she still has connections to that sort of original home that they had, but she doesn't really know it. And then the main character only has like this idea that she has roots somewhere else, but she has only ever known this one place. And I just think that that's kind of like also symbolic of what happens, is that with people when you have families that relocate to other places, and then their children grow up sort of like between two cultures, but mostly are affected by the one that they are actually 24/7 living in, you know. So I just thought that this was very beautifully written, and didn't like hammer you in the head with the themes. Like, it was very focused on, I think, that grandmother granddaughter connection.
Well, and then there was that moment where the mom found the daughter in the forest near where the portal was, and she had like that fear of losing her, of her like going back to another world. And I feel like that kind of captured something too, like that fear of like, can the generations stay connected, or are they going to lose each other to the different worlds? Like,
yeah, and also this idea that as a parent, you can't control what your child wants. You can only hope that they make the right decisions, and you have your hopes for them. Mm-hmm. And those hopes may not always realign with what they want. So I think there's also that sort of idea that because the mother character was also very sort of like almost antagonistic towards grandmother's past. Like, she was like, okay, let's forget about that other world. We are here now. This is our place. And like, it's that sort of idea of assimilation, essentially. Like, you have that that aspect as well, that there are people who are sort of like in like migrant families that have that need to like, okay, I'm gonna excel, I'm gonna like fully assimilate into the sort of mainstream culture, and that is also an experience that does happen, and it may not be the same as someone else's experience, but it's nice that the story also kind of gave voice to that as well.
Yeah, so like, I mean, now that I'm talking about, I'm thinking like the mom must have had that fear that she was going to lose her daughter because her daughter is interested in preserving grandma's traditions, and she's asking about her father, and then she finds this portal, and I think the mom realizes like she doesn't have to just be of this world, she can be multiple worlds and still choose the world that they're in, the home and her family. She doesn't have to give up things to be there, you know?
Yeah. And I just think that like it's especially like also important, but also closer to the truth to show that there can be actually like multiple different experiences existing in the same family. Yeah. So I just think that this story was, first of all, a really strong start, like for the entire like magazine, and it sort of sets the tone for this issue and what to expect from the other ones. And then the second one, are you ready to talk about Vampirito by K. Victoria Hernandez?
Yes.
Because this one was completely different.
Yeah.
Like,
the tone was very different.
Like, it was a complete like kind of whiplash, not necessarily in a bad way, but this is basically themed around colorism, racism. It is about this idea that what if vampires were just, other kinds of people living among us? And, you can be a vampire and you can be Spanish and you can be a vampire and be Cuban and Latino. And, that's why you have vampiros and vampires. And that was kind of a nice touch as well. And there's this like historical baggage in a sense, like that now, like in the present of the story, vampires have kind of integrated into the society, but then there's this sort of like history of like lynchings and stuff that is kind of hinted at, with the vampire myths that that are brought up in the story. And I thought this was interesting, but like what are your thoughts? How did you feel about this story?
I have a mix of thoughts. First of all, I thought that it was very readable. I liked the prose, like it drew me right in. And I think I hopped around a little. I didn't read all the stories in order. And at one point I was getting a little bit bored with one story and I started reading this one. And this one was like it was just really colorful. It was fun to read. I thought the prose was just really colorful. And I thought that the theming was really good. I thought like kind of using vampires as a stand-in for different marginalized experiences, being misunderstood, having people think one thing about you that isn't true and being a different way and trying to blend that and fit that and all that stuff. That was really great. And then the ending was just wild. I didn't get it at all.
Yeah, I'm basically like, I feel like the story where it ended, I was thinking like, okay, this is the sort of, like, this is the actual conflict that's going to propel the story forward. Like, to me, it felt like that. Like, the way it ended, I thought that should have, like, it should have continued. Like, I would have, like, actually, like a full novella set in this same world and following this same sorts of characters, I would be down for that. Like, I would be here for, like, extending this story and, like, exploring this world a bit more, because now I just kind of like I was reading it and it just ended like fully abruptly in the middle of a scene, and I was like,
it ended and I felt like I was supposed to understand what was happening, but I wasn't really sure even like what was happening.
Did someone die or
to represent?
Like I sort of got the feeling that Grandpa was becoming like because earlier in the story there's this idea that because they're in the playground and the main character is like, no, I don't have claws and I don't have the teeth and stuff. And then in the end, when they are doing the thing at the bully's place, the way Grandpa is described is sort of like he's becoming the sort of Nosferatu type vampire, But is it only in the head of the main character because like he's uncomfortable with what is happening and stuff, or is it actually happening? Like, it was weird. And I felt like it wasn't an ending. It was like the story was going to these places and I was like, okay, yeah, I'm here for the ride. And then it just stopped. Like I felt like I was sitting in a bus and the bus was taking me to Disneyland, and then the bus driver just pulls over and gets out of the bus and walks away.
Well, I got sitting there. I felt like I think I missed him. I think I'm just not smart enough. This story happened without me. I don't know. But I am wondering.
I don't even believe that. Like if you feel like you are not smart enough, I think that's a failure from the author to because you're not the only one. Because It was also like in the Goodreads group, other people were also like scratching their heads, and I'm scratching my head, and I feel like people who come from different backgrounds and have different levels of histories of reading and stuff, and they all come to the same conclusion. That means that that's on the author, I think. Like if everyone reads your story and it's like, well, I liked it, but then the end just kind of I don't want you to say that you are not smart enough, because that is not true.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying how it made me feel. These are the questions that made me ask, I'm just missing something. But
I'm also going to say that it's not also, this is not also to rag on the author or anything. I just feel like I wanted more. It had such a nice start and it was going into so interesting places, and then it just was like, what?
I wonder if she just wanted to leave it vague so that it was a little open to interpretation.
Yeah.
And I feel like maybe it was trying to go with we're vampiritos, vampiros, and we are not these classic vampire things. But then I wonder if through the bullying, through being in this culture where all of those things just kept being assumed of them over and over again, I wonder if the ending was kind of like they became those things just because that's what was constantly put on them, maybe?
I also think that it was really interesting, this idea that because the grandpa character was clearly thought of himself as superior to the main character's like father, who was like not correct and not a real vampire, essentially, because he was like darker skinned and like from a different like culture and not like not a European, essentially, whereas the grandpa character had like European ancestry. And so that was interesting, and I also think that it tackles this whole idea of like machismo and like macho culture, like this masculine idea that the grandpa character like has these certain values instilled in him by generations of other people, and they have to go show up to the bully to like prove that they're not weak, to prove this sort of masculinity, which I thought also was an interesting like theme.
Yeah.
And especially because like the main character is a child, like he's like 12 or something, like he's very young. And so it's also this idea of loss of innocence, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one thing that this story did really well is world building, like the way she described how these people, like who they are and how they have made their way in the world, and described that. Thought that was really interesting. And it made it much more clear that like the whole idea of vampires is kind of a stand-in for just this experience of being different, like being in a world where you are different, where you are misunderstood.
Yeah. I just feel like other than that, I personally just don't have much to say about the story, because it ended in such a like it just
We need
stopped.
more.
Yeah, I just like I wouldn't be opposed to a novella or even a novel from this exploring the same world, because I just feel like this had the bones to be something really cool, and it was on its way there, and then it just ran out of gas, essentially.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
Next up, we have A Little History of Things Lost and Found by Shingai Injeri Kagunda. And this one, I thought that the main theme was sort of this connection with nature, and also like conserving nature, and sort of this idea that when you lose connection with nature, then you kind of become estranged, and you sort of stop sharing in the same world, if that makes sense. Like you become foreign in your own home. You become foreign because you are sort of estranged from nature and estranged from the traditions that made you.
Yeah, I also saw it as like really showing the difference between a colonial relationship with nature versus a more, I guess, integrated relationship, or
yes,
as opposed to like owning nature, cohabiting with it and treating it as having value and respect and dignity separate from humans. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely feel like it had this idea of like, because every time there were these inferences to how the people who had forgotten nature, it was all about how they were stripping the forests and harvesting the trees out, and like encroaching on natural reserves, and making stuff like like the city of Nairobi was at the center of this, like this hulking big like entity that is sort of consuming and like reaching out its tendrils, sort of that sort of thing. And that's kind of like this cityscape is kind of like the heart of the like colonial approach.
And as they did that, they lost that connection with the forest and the like literal wisdom of the trees.
Yeah, and this idea that you both spiritually and literally stop understanding each other and stop being able to hear what the other one is saying. And it's like, it's both, and I think in this story it was kind of like both in terms of like how the main character was with her parents as well as with the nature. Like it was kind of like making a commentary on like you can be estranged from people and nature in the same way, because she has that like estrangement with her father and the rest of the family, and how they are dealing with the funeral of her mother and stuff like that, and they are unable to communicate with each other in a productive way and in like a positive way, and that's what the main character is also experiencing with the forest, unable to receive and hear what they are trying to tell her. And then also like this idea that the other party stops even trying to connect, because they're like, well, you're not listening anyway, so why should we give you our attention?
Right.
I just thought this had so many interesting like messages. But I also think that I am the first to say that I am not sure I understood everything. Because the way it is written is very like you have this sort of biography of the main character, but then you also have this snippets of like the trees telling their own experience. So at times I was like, am I in a dream? What am I reading?
And there's kind of like some time jumps and stuff.
Yeah. Like with this story, I think you really had to stay on your toes and be like in it, and you couldn't lose focus at any one point, because then you were kind of like lost in the story as well. Like I feel like this one, like you needed to be thinking about things all the time, and that isn't a bad thing. Don't get me wrong. It's just like this is a story that requires introspection, and if you are not in the mindset to be introspective and think about things, then it's probably not gonna stick the same way.
Yeah. This is one that I think it did a lot of really cool things, but I think it was one of my lesser favorites. When I was reading it, I was getting a little bit bored sometimes. The style is just a little bit hard to follow sometimes. But
I felt that the sort of like pacing and the way the story was structured was like very ponderous at times. Like when we were discussing Vampirito, you said that it was very readable. So kind of like, I think that for me at least, because I read this like in the order of how they were presented, I feel like jumping in from Vampirito, which was very readable and sort of like had a very like simplistic but not oh Kristen, oh no, did I lose you? Hey, are you back?
Yeah, sorry, I had to switch cameras because I needed to plug in my laptop. So is it working?
No worries. I just lost you for a moment. I'm not seeing your I'm seeing a black screen, but I'm hearing you.
There we go.
Now
okay.
I see you.
I am so sorry about that.
No worries, no worries. I mean, what would be a live show without some technical difficulties?
Right.
Like, it has to happen. It needs to happen. But yeah, I just felt like in terms of like style, it was this story was kind of like ponderous and sort of like more literary in its styling than some of the other stories, and it also was kind of like slow. So
it was
I
very
feel like,
slow, and it kind of had like that more spiritual aspect to it. So you kind of have to get in the right mind frame from that. And I think a lot of, especially Western readers, are less familiar with that kind of storytelling, and so it's a little bit more work for us to like get into that headspace. But like the idea of like this spiritual connection with literal trees and just this very poetic, expansive kind of way of telling the story is, I mean, I think ponderous is a really great word to use for that. I also had that experience.
I would also say that I personally feel that this would work, like, for me at least, I think I would get more out of it on a reread. Like, like I feel like first time reading it, you're just kind of like test driving it, and then on a second time you'd probably get more out of it. But this is definitely a story that, for me at least, requires more work, and you need to be like prepared to put that work in. It's definitely like not one of my favorites from this magazine, but I'm just generally saying that the quality, in my opinion, of the stories in this magazine was so friggin' good. Like, I enjoyed pretty much every story in this magazine to some extent. Like I didn't have a story in this magazine where I felt like, oh no, I have to read this. Like, it's like each of these gave me something, and each of them gave me something to think about. So I just think that it's sort of like nitpicking sort of to find favorites. But on a favorite note, one of my actual favorites in this magazine is the next one. So, The Frankly Impossible Weight of Han by Maria Dong. I love this story. I just need to get it out there. I loved this story so much. It was like it kind of does this meta thing where you're kind of like you're kind of like expected to accept a bunch of things, and the story kind of pokes fun at that concept itself. It's like, okay, let's assume that this thing is possible and run with it, and it kind of like breaks the fourth wall kind of to do that. But all in all, I think that this story is just about grief and like systems failing people, and how, if a system fails enough people, how that can escalate into this kind of like event where other people end up suffering that had nothing to do with the original conflict, in a sense. And what are your thoughts? I'm just like, I just thought that this was everything. I will go so far as to say that I would probably nominate this for a Hugo, or for a short story Hugo, because I really loved it. Like, tonally, writing style, it was like the way it was told was very different. Like, it just like felt like a breath of fresh air.
I was actually going to ask you, like, would you nominate any of these for the Hugos this year?
I mean, just from these I would nominate probably a couple, but you know, I have this like spreadsheet where I'm like putting my favorites down, so that when nomination period comes, I have this nice Excel spreadsheet to look at least when it comes to short stories.
Smart. Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out exactly how to keep track because I just started reading short stories for this year. But anyways,
Same.
I really love this one a lot too. There were so many really cool elements in it. It was really fascinating. I loved that like impossible technology thing that was kind of the device that shaped the whole story. I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved that there was also mixed with that sci-fi technology kind of bit, the like fantastical
Yeah, like magic and spirituality.
yeah, like there's the goddesses and the ghosts, and I just love that combination. I like the multiple perspectives and how it all came together. It hit. It was impactful. Yeah, I thought it was a great. I thought it was a great story.
Yeah, I actually find it interesting that the first part of the story, they are sort of like interviewing these ghosts that have come. So to me personally, the way I read it was that the first part of the story is kind of just the government trying to understand what the hell is going on and trying to investigate and sort of investigating these, like, because it's saying that these ghosts are appearing because they are being like killed, like something happens to them and there's just these ghosts and they're being interviewed and they tell these things about what happened and stuff, and then it switches over to the grandmother character and it's like, well, we can't know for sure, but this is approximately what probably could have happened. I think that there is this idea that the story itself didn't take itself too seriously, even though it was talking about a very like serious issue, and this idea of how one person's grief can affect like whole communities if they have if they sort of have the power to make it affect others in a sense.
Yeah. Well, and I also think that the way the wife died right in the very beginning when they explained that, it really set the tone of like the whole story and how it's systems that are hurting. Yeah. And I also, there were just so many colorful things in here, like the spot where they were talking, I think they were talking with the goddesses or something. And they're like, well, where is this happening? Well, they're like, oh, mostly in America. Like the bad things are just, they're mostly in America. It just made me chuckle. And then I also love the description of the goddess who is wet and like just always dripping water on the kitchen floor. Like,
yeah, the ghost of ruining the grandma's linoleum floor. I just like, yeah, that was, I just, is it wrong to say that I felt so incredibly happy reading this story, even though it was such a dark topic? Like, this story was dark, but it was like it was like dark in the same way as like some like, I don't want to compare it to a Black Mirror episode because it is most definitely not a Black Mirror-esque episode, but the sort of like tone was similar. Like you have this sort of aloof, funny type of tone, but then the topic itself is kind of like dark and serious. But I think actually that kind of like brings it to the title as itself, like the frankly impossible weight of harm, the impossible weight of someone else's grief, the impossible weight of like pressure and bad things that can happen because of that. And this idea that this weight is being counteracted with laughter and kindness in a sense, and like reaching out.
Well, we live in very dark times, right? Like, especially when you're thinking of just like systemic problems. There is a lot of grief in the world. There's a lot of injustice, and it is weighty. I think most of us feel that. And so then to address it directly is really cathartic. And to do that in a really hopeful, uplifting light, like, what are we going to do about it? Here it is. This is our world. But also just in a hopeful way, in a story that portrays kindness and liberation. It feels really good. I think it was handled really well.
Yes, and it also like this whole idea that the story isn't even supposed to be realistic, but there's that feeling of catharsis, as you said, and I feel like this, it gives you the sort of hopefulness that if something were to happen to me, or someone, like that sort of terrible grief would take over, then someone would come and reach out and be willing to like carry it with you. Like, that is a really beautiful thought. But also, like, it can have like a sort of like this double-edged sword, like, because like how the grandma looks in the end, like how someone like holding on to someone else's like sorrow and grief and problems can weigh on you. And this sort of idea, like it is also sort of like offering their emotional labor in the service of another person. That's also like an interesting point.
Yeah.
But yeah, this was like one of my favorites for sure. I was having such a fun time reading this, like, really. Should we move on to the next one?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so next one is All Worlds Left Behind by Iona Dutt Sharma. And this one I also thought that tackled a little bit of the same themes as The Taste of Centuries, the first story, but sort of like this idea where that parental figure has already gone.
Yeah.
And I just like, whereas The Frankly Impossible Weight of Han was really like sort of like funny and tongue-in-cheek while discussing dark themes, I think this one was actually kind of somber, and really like you felt this conflict within the main character. Like, she was trying to find these connections. Like, there's this bitterness about like being being a part of something, but being also removed from it, and not like, and also thinking about the future, like this idea that our children can find their own door, you know, and then this idea that they are gonna find their own world and be a part of that, and she will just, you know, get the remnants of that connection that she had, and she wasn't able to experience like the full thing, because she has kind of like is so many generations removed from the like source, in a sense. And also, to add to that, this idea that she was connecting to this place through her father, who had more connection, and then losing her father, it's like she's losing two things.
Yeah. I thought this was beautifully written. I really liked it, but it is definitely a lot more somber, and it's very much about just the grieving process of having to leave things behind. And the portrayal of the pain and everything, the process, is really believable and moving. She like goes through this process where she tries to go back to that world and communicate with people and try to buy things, and really struggling with it. She can't find the words, and just that like frustration of like, but no, like, this is my world. I have a right to be here. I knew this language, but now I'm losing it, and it's like I don't have a right to be here in some ways anymore, and I can't fully engage and enjoy everything here. And it has this heavy sense of loss. And in the end, you kind of see her come to this place of acceptance. And it just really feels like this was the story of her grieving process. In the end, she's like, well, I can't remember the word for orange. I guess the word is just orange. Like,
yeah, that like I felt very sad, and also like this story comes like that. That's another thing related to like this whole magazine. I was really happy about all the content warnings that each story had, like the like key content warnings at the start of the story, so you kind of knew what you were getting into. Like, this has a major content warning for death of a parent, and the whole grief and the process of loss. And yeah, I like this story felt like you were putting on like a heavy mantle of something, because it was like it sort of like sucks you into this character's headspace, and this character, like, just like the main character's like partner says to her, like, in this moment you do not like anything, you are unable to like anything, and everything feels like it has always felt this way, and that's why you are also unable to make connections in the place, because like it all feels wrong, because it is now removed from the person you had those moments with. But yeah, this was like, the writing style was so beautiful. This was also one of those where I felt like this was very like genre fiction written in a very literary way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think you can even draw parallels, like, very literally to, like, if you are a child of an immigrant, they are kind of your access key back to their home country, right? Like, so, you know, they are native speakers of the language there, and maybe you don't. So like, I can see this very literally being like losing an immigrant parent and wanting to go back to their home country and feeling like this is a major part of your identity, but then also feeling lost without the parent as that anchor, feeling like,
yes,
you're not a native speaker. Do you really belong here? You can go there, but without your parent kind of connecting you, you're starting to lose that identity, and that's a grieving process, you know.
And there's also that idea that your parent is the one person who kind of not only is the bridge to your, like, to that other culture, to that like to that source culture in a sense, but they're also the one who would probably give you validation and accept you, like, as this child of two different places in a sense. Whereas if you go back and you're just surrounded by people who don't know your experience, they will just think of you as other, and you kind of lose that sense of belonging to that place, because you don't have that, as you said, sort of like key or anchor to hold you to that place. So you're kind of just floating between. And that can also be a very like scary experience, and sort of like, so who am I now without this person here? So
yeah, when I was reading this, I really got, my impression was that this place was, more than anything, it was a source of identity for this character. That it wasn't home, it wasn't a place that they needed. It was a place that they liked to go. It was a place where they were with their father, and it was a place that they identified as, this is part of who I am. And then when they lost their father, when they lost their ability to be in this place as easily, it really felt like they were losing a big part of their identity. And it wasn't like they needed that. Like, I think, didn't the fiance even say like, oh, you still go there? Like, why would you go there? Because you don't need to. That's not your home. That's not your family. It's just, but it's such a big part of her identity.
I also thought that this story had like very like the main character has the mother-in-law who tries her best, but is also kind of like what's the polite word? Doesn't really understand the nuances of like certain things, and she's kind of like well-meaning but also kind of cringe in a sense that she's kind of like stepping on some boundaries even while she's trying to maintain boundaries. And you can clearly see that the main character, because she's grieving, she's also like kind of like annoyed and also like stressed out, like this is another added stressor for her, that she has to like navigate this relationship with her fiance's family, and also and also like this juxtaposition of having the funeral and the wedding, like, and that being like this idea of like having this huge like grief, but also this event of like immense joy, and that whole like guilt around it. Am I allowed to feel joy anymore?
Yeah.
Like, you know, I just, this was also like, this was so different also from the other one. Like these old stories, like they have similar like theming and stuff, and they work together in a collection, but also like each one is so different. And I think this one was like, I felt like this one was kind of hard to read, in a sense that I felt for the character. Like I also felt sad, especially like considering like I am in my 30s and stuff, and my parents are getting older and stuff. So it's like, it's starting to become like this reality that your parents are not forever. So it's like, it was really like, I'm not gonna say depressing, but it was like hard to read. It was kind of like sombering, I would say. Like it really like makes you sort of wake up to this idea that you are going to the longer you live, you are going to end up losing more things.
Yeah.
But also another like Hugo nomination worthy story, in my opinion. Like I just like these last two stories just like
gut punches.
Yeah, like I would say that the very first one, and then the Frankly Impossible Weight of Han, and this one were my like top 3 of this magazine. Like, and not to say that the other ones were bad, but it just like goes to show the sheer quality that was present. Like I can't wait to read the other issues of this like magazine, because this was just such a nice start. Like like their first issue, and they just, you know, out with a bang, and just very thoughtfully curated.
Yeah. And
the very last thing that we have on the bracket is the non-fiction essay, Grandma Stories and the Gaps They Bridge by C.H. Hong, which is a non-fiction essay that was originally published in, I think it was published as a part of some blog or something, and now it was republished in the Khōréō magazine.
Really sad.
I read everything, the acknowledgements, the like editor's note and stuff. So, you know, it was. I think it was mentioned there somewhere.
I'm wondering, would this be eligible for related work of the category of Hugo Awards?
I am not sure. I would need, like, if it was published the same year as the semi-prozine was published, then I would think it would be counted. But I would need to make sure, because I think the original like publication date even was given in the.
I think you're right. I can maybe look it up while we're talking.
But speaking of like related work, this was very well written, and like I related to a lot of it, even from my like own measly heritage, like this idea that like you don't, like, even if you're part of something, you don't really think you have the authority or the authenticity to speak to that experience because you experience it in a different way than people. I hate to use the word source culture, but I like the people from the non-diaspora part of the world experience it. Like, for example, like I personally, I am third generation removed from Karelia. Like my great grandfather and my like grandmother still had like they spoke the language and they were like heavily immersed in the Karelian side of culture, and then after that they're kind of like, especially after the wars, it became necessary to sort of assimilate into the main Finnish like culture. So my mom and her siblings didn't learn to speak Karelian language anymore, and so me and my siblings didn't learn it, and I'm sort of now trying to like reintroduce myself to parts of that part of my own heritage. So I really felt this whole theme of this idea that you have these parts of a culture that you are experiencing, but because of different things, you are not experiencing them in the same way as the people who are actually currently living in that culture. And I think it's interesting, this idea of time capsules, like this idea that, for example, people who immigrated, let's say 20 years ago, they are kind of like their parents are kind of like stuck in that time when they immigrated. And so you as a person are receiving that time capsule, but the like culture moves onwards. Like it's kind of like a river that splits into two different like currents.
Yeah. I loved this essay. I thought it was great. I loved the term grandma stories. I'm not familiar with that term, and it's just such a sweet term that like grandma stories are just these stories that all the grandmas tell, and are like the folk tales of the culture or whatever. And all the grandmas might tell them a little bit differently, but at the end of the day, they're the same story. And
yeah, I remember I had this. I call her my adopted grandma, basically, but there's this auntie who lived next door to us, like next door, 2 kilometers away from our house, in another house. And I used to like go visit her, and we would pull weeds at her garden, and she would tell me stories while we were pulling weeds. And that made the whole experience of pulling weeds, which is a horrible, detestable chore, into a fun experience and feel like an adventure, because she was telling me all these stories about like water spirits and princesses trapped in mountains and stuff like that. It was interesting. And then afterwards, as I've tried to like find those stories that she told, I've realized that she was just sort of telling her own versions of stories that she had read or heard as a kid, and then they kind of evolve into other things. Like they maintain their core messaging, but they're still not exactly the same as what you find in, for example, books.
Yeah.
And it's just like, this was another one that sort of like awakened this sense of nostalgia in me. Like I could imagine like that feeling, like as if I was a child again, and I was like, yeah, I also have like sort of like grandmas and grandma adjacent people who have told me these stories. But there is also the added lens that because I am sort of born from well, not sort of, I am born of the main culture. I've never had that experience in a sense where other people are criticizing me for telling these stories, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's also kind of must be hard and difficult, this idea that you have to sort of defend your right to parts of your own self.
Yeah.
And also this idea that what does it like what do you lose as a person if someone else has different versions of the same thing? Like this whole authenticity policing is kind of like, what do you gain out of it? Like what, why does there need to be this purity of culture when, like, even in the same geographical area you can have 2, 4, 5 different very, very like varied cultures existing in the same plane, and they're all equally as, you know, as valid?
I mean, it's kind of a complicated topic because I feel like there's this obsession with purity and authenticity, and it is a little bit complicated because when you have, like, say, white creators making stories about not their own culture, then it does matter that they're not telling authentic stories or that they're not being pure or whatever. But then I think we get too wrapped up in that, and every story has to be like perfectly authentic and perfectly pure. And I think the point of this essay is really to say, like, if you are a diaspora person, you have your own culture, and it doesn't have to be purely the culture that you or your parents or your ancestors immigrated from, but you and your the way that it has evolved with you, that evolution in itself is a valid and authentic culture. That is your story, and that is just as valid as a perfectly pure, authentic story from the culture you're from. And even just the idea that there is like this purity to, like, I mean, just like take any country or culture, like, I mean, countries themselves, cultures themselves are always evolving. So to say that something is truly pure or authentic is kind of a misnomer to begin with, because there is
it's kind of like a false expectation in a like the expectation for purity starts on a false foundation to begin with. Because if you think about, like, for example, take one country, like, think about, for example, let's think about, like, for example, I'm gonna just use Finland, for example. Finland has had a history of like 2 different empires colonizing this place, and then a 100-year stretch of independence and stuff. And all of those like periods have like irreversibly changed how the culture operates, and it has kind of like moved the culture in a different direction. The same thing could be could be said, for example, China, that used to be a collection of small kingdoms, and then during the like Mongol invasion became one large empire, and then like how that whole thing started, and it has been influenced by lots of different things, and also like nowadays with the like communist regime, there's like different like value systems of what is being pushed forward as like acceptable lore and acceptable like stories and stuff. So this whole idea that you have this one strand of pure culture that is like the thing that we are pushing forward is a false premise.
Yep.
And in a sense, it's like this idea of a time capsule comes again. Like,
Yeah.
like even in like, it's, I don't know, it's like I just find this whole topic so interesting, and the whole premise of this essay is so interesting to think about. Like, it's like it's definitely not an idea that can be just solved like this, because it's like something that is sort of painful to think about. It is a subject that has a lot of pain and sort of frustration and like many different things woven into it, like for the people who are experiencing it as we speak. And it's like it's hard to say that could this whole idea be like solved with hugs and rainbows. Probably not, because people are always like sort of clinging on to like, this is my thing. And maybe that's kind of the issue here, is that the people from the culture who are like gatekeeping, essentially, they're also holding on to their thing in a sense. And it's like, I guess it all ends up in a sort of like tribalism sort of thing.
I think people do it to themselves too, like immigrants, third culture kids, people that feel like they're between worlds. They're not really fully where they are. They're not really fully where they're from. And I really see this essay as validating them and saying, but where you are, that experience is its own thing, and that's valid and authentic.
Yes.
And we need to hear that story also.
Yes, exactly. I just think that this whole essay had this idea of encouragement and this idea of, it's okay that you do not like how to say, like, it is okay to not be the same as you are expected to be, yeah, I just thought that this was very interesting to think about, and it definitely, like, as we are having this discussion, this essay definitely gave me a lot of things to think about and really like ponder, because I definitely feel like I myself have also, like, if I look back for my, like, for example, book reviews, like, let's say 4 or 5 years ago, I definitely have fallen to this, not necessarily gatekeeping, but this kind of purist thinking of what is authenticity. And you kind of like it requires work to kind of admit to yourself that, first of all, you do that, and second of all, that you can grow out of it. And well, growing out of it, but like kind of basically dig yourself out of the hole that you have built for yourself, essentially. But yeah. So yeah, those were all of the stories. And those were all of the stories. And with that, do you think, after having discussed all these stories, do you think that the magazine lived up to the hype, so to speak? Do you think it lived up to all the expectations that you had for it going in?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it definitely hit the themes I was expecting it to hit, and the stories were really enjoyable. And I definitely am going to start looking for those authors now. Like, I already, Maria Dong, I was just listening to one of her stories on, I think it was Lightspeed magazine podcast. She has another one. So yeah, I'm going to be looking for those authors now and trying to remember them.
I definitely have the same thing, that I definitely want to read more from Maria Dong, and also like Iona Dutt Sharma and Jennifer Hudak, and also like basically every single author in this. I'm like gonna be keeping tabs, but especially like Jennifer Hudak and Maria Dong probably. And before we go, because I have apparently food in the oven that I need to go quickly take out. Like my partner sent me a DM and said that, hey, there's pizza in the oven, and I'm like, oh no. So before we go, what is a piece of media, like anything like a movie, a book, anything that kind of follows these similar themes that you would want to like recommend to people? Like if you liked these stories and if you like this magazine, what piece of media do you think would be interesting to look at?
Man, I feel like I'm going to probably think of more things later, but the only thing I can think right now is Vagabonds, which is a novel by Ha Feng. It's about a main character who grew up on Mars and gets a chance to go basically do like a study abroad kind of experience on Earth, and then she comes back and she kind of has some of these same feelings of feeling caught between two worlds, not sure where she belongs, not sure like what her values are now. So yeah, I think there's some similar things there, but I'm sure, like, I wish I could think of like TV shows or something. I can't think of anything right now.
Well, I have a movie because I've now seen it 2 times, once in English and once in Finnish, and that is Disney's Encanto.
Oh, it's so good.
Like I watched that one, and I think that movie definitely has this idea of like it isn't necessarily like fully on like diaspora immigrant experience, but it's definitely this idea of multi-generational family and this sort of like burden of changing family values, like how different generations view things differently, and the expectations that are placed on them by the older generations, essentially. And a very beautiful movie. I am expecting to watch the Spanish dub next because I am pretty obsessed with it.
It's so great.
Yeah,
I like the singers in the Spanish dub version maybe better. They have beautiful voices.
The songs in the Spanish dub are like We Don't Talk About Bruno in Spanish is great. But yeah, thank you all for coming to the live show. And if you are catching this after, leave a comment and leave us a world emoji, like a globe emoji, if you are catching this after the actual live. And yeah, without further ado, I'm off to take my pizza out of the oven, and we'll see you in another live show next month. And both of me and Kristen will have videos coming up on our respective channels. Links in the description. Bye-bye.
Bye.